Good morning. This is Theo Henderson from unhoused. We are in the throes of the coronavirus, or COVID-19, shelter-in-place order. And in essence, we're practicing social distancing. And social distancing means a lot of things. One may ask the question, how does people interview in social distancing? So this video will also show about how we became creative in social distancing. No, we're not on top of each other. We're not in 50 people in close quarters, but we can do the same things, but we have to be creative in order to do it. The stories still need to be told, and we have to be creative, which is also a nudge to Council President Nuri Martinez. If we can be creative in finding ways to get information out to very distressed Angelenos, certainly you can find some creative ways of conducting a meeting that's help the housed and unhoused community. For example, they immediately freeze and put a moratorium on rent and mortgage payments, as well as eviction notices. Right now, as we speak, people are doing what you say, Mayor Garcetti, and yet they're opening their door and see an eviction notice, throwing them out if they don't pay the rent, based on the fact that they don't have any jobs. So, and the jobs that they have that you are putting on your post is not always going to be applicable to the careers that some of the housed residents have. Without further ado, my title of this podcast is called We're All in This Together. And in the studios now is Sarah Chisholm, and she's the author of
I have a story in Made in LA.
Made in LA
Writers, this one is called Chasing the Elusive Dream. And this is just a collection of stories by Angelenos about Angelenos for Angelenos. So
that is exciting. I brought her on because she was on my first episode of We the Unhoused. And I brought her on because this was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. How did the coronavirus affect her personally, with her career, and if her family, if there's any issues. So can you tell us a little bit, how does it affected you career-wise? Let's take it from the top.
Right now, basically, I am distance teaching, which, I mean, it's good and everything, but I definitely, have worries for my students, worries for my own children, and worries for just the general public in general, because I mean, we're all in this, like you said, we're all in this together, and this has been a very difficult time for not only Los Angeles, but for the rest of the world. But definitely, us as Angelenos, we have our own things that are happening within our city specifically. So that's something very important, which every city has, but definitely want to address like some reasons or some, issues that we may have within our own city.
Speaking of specific issues for Angelenos, I have been distressed, and I had in episode 14, I had made a promo with the Zinmei owner and cook, Michelle Liu, and her restaurant Zinmei Bistro. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus hysteria, she's panicked, as well as the anti-Chinese sentiment that has been defacing her business. She is in a bit more of a frightened state and will not be joining us this interview. Has you experienced any of this anti-coronavirus sentiment? Because you can tell us a little bit more than to the audience what's going on.
Basically, I have like a interracial family, like a biracial family. My children are half Asian. They're specifically Chinese Vietnamese descent. And, this is a population within California where it's a large Asian population. It's about 12% of the population. And a lot of people have close ties to China here or are of Chinese descent. And it's been really hard for my children specifically. My son is very, he definitely looks as if he's of Asian descent.
Yes.
So he did get beat up. And
wait a minute, he got beat up? What happened?
This is like a 9-year-old child.
Okay.
He came home one day and he's just like, the kids had specifically said, these are their words, Chin Chong, coronavirus, you're part Asian, like you're part Chinese, and you gave this to us. And like I saw a bruise on my son's shoulder, and they had said like, I asked him like, well, what happened? And he said that they kicked him. So they had him on the ground, kicking him just because he's part Asian.
Do you think that this has anything to do with, because I have become alarmed, and I don't know if many citizens have, because Meghan McCain has a different viewpoint. She's thinking that we live in a PC culture and it's not a big deal. But President Trump has been known to say the Chinese virus. There are some insiders that in around his administration call it the Kung Flu virus. Do you think that his leadership, or lack thereof, has been instrumental in a lot of these uptick in anti-Asian attacks?
Well, definitely. And I think that when we, stand by the rhetoric of like naming viruses after ethnicities, I mean, we can't do that. Viruses exist in every continent, in every community, everywhere, and we can't label viruses like that. And I think it's definitely affected Chinese Americans or Chinese people who not only live in Los Angeles but live around the world. Possibly, the effects of it are very devastating for them, because like I'm talking about, like, my son is a 9-year-old child, and other children are bringing this sentiment, and I mean, he doesn't understand. He's just like, it's just a virus, I have nothing to do with this. He's even Chinese Vietnamese, so like, his family doesn't even speak that language specifically, and hasn't been in China for quite some time. It's very removed from that, but still, because he's of Asian descent, part Asian descent even, people are, other children are beating him up for this.
Partly because children reflect and do the good of us as well as the worst of us. So that has a part of it. But I also I've looked through history and I haven't found it. But I remember the influenza of 1900. No one ever called it the honky virus, or they never called him, white people virus or any of that. So I was become disconcerted because I have heard kids talk about Ebola, and they would use it to stigmatize African people, and particularly Ebola was in the Congo. And so this is not unknown, but this is definitely a resource that has been used and tapped into by people who are using it for political gain. President Trump has said recently that he doesn't want the Asian community picked on, but this is a little too late, because he has also had rhetoric against the Muslim people. He's also had rhetoric against Latinos, calling them rapists and MS-13s and this kind of thing. So it seems to be in line with a lot of Americans that has a lot of fear and ignorance, which I would like to speak on. Do you notice any other fear and ignorance that's going on? Because I can say a few, but what do you have?
Basically, people are, and it's okay to be, scared. I feel like scared is a natural reaction to something like this, of course. But if you're panic buying guns or things like that, I feel that doesn't, or panic buying all the supplies at the grocery store. Please don't do that, because it makes other people panicky as well, and it kind of creates this domino effect. And the truckers and the grocery store workers and food service workers, they're doing their best to help us. And I mean, are you going to drink up 12 gallons of milk in a week?
Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, if you freeze it, it's going to be processed cheese, right? So doing things like that is not helpful. It's actually, in a lot of cases where they're panic buying, it's actually going to be pretty wasteful.
Exactly.
In the end, because you're not going to eat up like 50, things of string cheese in 2 weeks. It's just not possible. And so your stuff is naturally going to rot. So just to be mindful of that, because panic buying, it's like you're buying things where you should be saving your money, because this is a national crisis, an emergency. So I feel like a lot of money may be wasted in that way. Definitely.
I will add on a couple of things. So to be clear, the coronavirus is not in the air. And I have had, I won't mention the store, but it was very annoying because the owner is running around with masks. And I want to speak on that, because a lot of the medical masks that has been taking away from healthcare workers that are treating people that need it. If you do not have the coronavirus, you're just panic buying and taking these masks that these probably we could use to help save some lives. And secondly, as you can see here, is that once you get get one of these, it's not necessary to have over 50 boxes of hand sanitizer when we have people in the unhoused community that needs these as well. There have hand washing stations by the city, but there's no water in it. No one's taking care of it. And many of the unhoused have no clue of what the hell's going on.
Might I also add that they usually don't stock it with soap. And I'm supposing they do that because they know, like, oh, maybe unhoused people will bathe themselves there. But, I mean, you need to bathe, you know, everybody, that's a human decent right to bathe yourself. You want to bathe yourself. And especially during this time, it's important to stock those bathrooms up because they do need to, and open them. Keep them open, please, because they need to keep clean as well. Like, right? And
they want to keep clean. That's the irony of the whole situation, that they're blaming unhoused people. People are acting panicking. And here I have a San Francisco mayor that's saying that unhoused people go home to go to the bathroom because it's the ridiculousness.
So they are going to open up the recreational area.
They are supposed to be opening up 42, but as of today, the Alpine Recreation Center has not opened the bathroom. This is for people that have disabilities. I went last night, believe it or not, to Shell restroom. They won't open the bath. They never open the bathrooms for people with disability anyway, and they refuse to open it due to coronavirus. I had a challenge with the Starbucks, which I will elaborate further on in the interview, but that's another issue.
Well, I mean, you want to stop the spread of the virus, and you have to make sure that you have adequate supplies for all members of the community, and that's a big important thing, I feel. And I feel like you had said, like, we're all in this together, so there has to be, you know, it's like, oh, this Chinese, you know, sentiment, it doesn't just affect Chinese American people, you know, oh, this homeless sentiment, it doesn't just affect homeless people.
Exactly.
It doesn't, oh, you know, people aren't able to pay their bills. This doesn't just affect housed people.
Exactly.
We have to be all in this together as Angelenos, and just across the world, you know, that there's a difficulty here. Let's band together. There's things that are very specific to our community, and there's things that are happening around the world. You know, this virus is happening around the world, and it can ban us as, you know, unite us all. And I feel like that should be more of what's coming out of this, because this is just kind of, you know, unbelievable.
You know, there's a sentiment that they says, if America gets the cold, the rest of the world gets the flu. And as we see this now, that's a very true reality. The coronavirus has crippled a lot of life of people that have lives on a lot of jobs that are 1 or 2 paychecks away, and they are trying to do with the shelter in place, and they still are facing evictions, scrupulous. We're leaving the responsibilities to greed and capitalistic. The capitalistic society is always going to be winners and losers. And the people that are not doing well and that are barely hanging on, we're relying on them. For example, the people in the grocery stores, we've been arguing about that they should have a livable wage, and we've pushed back on it. I think it's a cruel sense of irony that we're depending on them to stay open and have them work all these hours, and we gave them a couple of dollars to assuage our guilt in this pandemic. They deserve more than a couple of dollars. They deserve a livable wage. They are basically keeping us alive. If they were to go on to strike tomorrow, this whole economy would collapse. So think on that. Is there anything else would you like to share from your book that you wanted to talk about?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a new book that's in the works or in the progress. So I do have a story about Chinatown specifically and Chinese American identity, and I would like to read a little excerpt from it. And I mean, this book, yes, made in LA, it is by Angelenos or Angelenos, about Angelenos, but you can find commonality in it throughout any community, because we want to also like cherish the landscape of Los Angeles, but also, especially since we're in this pandemic, you know, we're all in this together. We really are. And the third installment is called Art of Transformation. And after this coronavirus and after this pandemic, there will definitely be some transforming, right? For us as a society. Yes. And all societies in all cities. Mm-hmm. So just something that I wanted to say. But this story is called The Fortune of the Three and the Kabuki Mask. They didn't belong among the rice paddy straw hats, paper umbrellas, and flowery silken Chinese collar shirts. The red and white lacquer of the kabuki mask grew hot and glimmered in the sun that tilted through the window. I asked my mother why she kept them there. Why put them next to the mediocre jade bracelets and plastic amulets of jovial Buddhas? Wouldn't they have been better suited a mile away in one of the air-conditioned shops of Little Tokyo? She just grinned as she unwrapped the papier-mâché mask. Florence, my dear daughter, money is money, Ba said as he wiped down one of the glass countertops of our non-air-conditioned souvenir shop. Gray bellows of smoke from smoldering incense sticks attempted to claim every whisper of fresh air. I should have been kneeling my slender body at the altar of the front of the shop, my delicate hands and calloused fingertips, placing tangerines in one of its white porcelain bowls with indigo flower print. I should have filled one of the vases with fresh marigolds not yet dried out from the California heat, or lit more incense sticks and placed them sticking up in the rice that occupied a single bowl in front of the medium-sized smiling gold Buddha. Maybe if I had prayed, a gust of wind would have forced its way in and dried the sweat on the back of my neck so that all my long black pinned straight hair wouldn't stick there. Maybe then I wouldn't have to blink away melted and smeared eye makeup. A brisk wind would have been the only way that I would get some air conditioning because Bob wasn't going to pay for shit. If money is money, why won't you fix the air conditioner? I asked. Bob gave me a fleeting glare. So this one is basically my story is that there's a Chinese American souvenir shop and the father has a kabuki mask, which is clearly like a Japanese thing. Yes. Right. So the moral of this story is, then I can read another little excerpt. Right. But the moral of the story is that not all Chinese Americans or Chinese people feel or think the same, and also definitely not all Asian cultures are the same. So when we speak about individuals having a very specific Angelino identity, having a very specific ethnic identity, we want to be careful how we portray it, because it's up to them to portray their own identity and how they feel about that identity, and that's what this story is about. So as we go into this coronavirus crisis and we're using that Chinese, anti-Chinese sentiment, that is not the way necessarily that everybody identifies. There's very clear distinction between Chinese and Chinese American identity, and everybody's able to create their own perception of what they find themselves to be, and viruses are different. Viruses don't do that. Right. So
dead is dead, whether you're Chinese, black, white, rich, unhoused, and housed. So let us be clear that we're all in this together, and it has been my hope, as well as what I've been doing with this podcast, has been trying to educate people that have engaged in tribalism, has believed in certain things about certain groups of people, that doesn't matter now. It's over for that, because if you fear that I'm a threat, or you can't let me use the restroom because I'm a human being and you don't see me as a human being, then you are guilty of that. Conversely, I'm guilty if I think all Asian people are responsible for the coronavirus. And so this negative chain effect will harm all of us, because again, the coronavirus, and dead is dead. The coronavirus will not discriminate. It will get equal opportunity death is what is on the menu. So thank you for you coming in, and
fist bump from far.
Right, from far. Get social distancing, right? Thank you all for listening, and may we again meet in the light of understanding. Thank you for showing. Thank you. This is Theo Henderson from unhoused. We're in the studios today, and as you can see, we're practicing social distancing as we are apart. And this is also an open example to the leaders of our city of Los Angeles that if we can be creatively using our resources to have a conversation that's very necessary to calm the citizens of Los Angeles and around the world, why can't Nuri Martinez and her paid elected officials that we voted them in do the same? So in the studios, I'm going to let her introduce herself. She's been a very big proponent, and we were talking about the coronavirus earlier, and we were talking about it reaching all of us. The title of this podcast is called We're All in the Same Boat. We're in this together. So we are going to get some insight on what it is like for the unhoused looking into shelters as an option. I personally will not be going to shelter. One, I have injuries, and then I also feel that shelters have had always a bad historical precedent with me, as well as the NIMBYs and the mantra that we always need security and police officers because we're criminals. And I don't like feeling like I'm in prison because you guys don't feel like it normally. Most importantly as well is the health dangers that follows it as well. If you want to help me, you can get me a motel room where I can have my own place, where I don't have to put my belongings in a trash can, and I can be able to do my own hygiene needs. I can go to the bathroom and not worry about having to plan a Mission Impossible course to find a bathroom. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest. So tell us for the audience, how would you like to be called, and your pronouns if you like.
So my name's Victoria. She, her is fine. So yeah.
Welcome. Yes. Thank you very much for coming. She traveled vast distances, but the reason why I brought her here because she's very important to the We Unhoused movement, because she has been on an investigation on how these shelters are. So she's going to tell us a little bit about that. So what's going on?
So I personally went to the North Hollywood one first, and it was full. And I figured they wouldn't let me take pictures in there, and also I don't want to come off as intrusive because there are still people there. It's just a recreation center. We've all been to one, so it was emergency, so it was built very fast. Of course they didn't make a wall to separate everybody. It's just a bunch of army beds with a piece of cloth over it. There is no real sense of privacy. I do have video footage and photos. Same thing with the bathrooms. They didn't even section it off. From your podcast, I've heard, I forgot their name, but a trans person talked about that being an issue.
Exactly.
So they're just exposed.
Yes.
I mean, it's a pool place, so it wasn't made with the intention. So normally you'd have a bathing suit, but no one's walking in there with a bathing suit, so there's no even real door between the outside and the actual bathroom. So for me, it was just, I had a feeling it was like that, but it's just you're putting a bunch of people, sick and not sick, in a gym. There is police there. One of the vehicles, it looked a bit kind of undercover, and I saw Allied Services, or the private security one. I was surprised they actually had nurses on the scene.
Can I back up a little bit because I want the audience to understand? Allied University has had an open, hostile relationship with unhoused people. In particular, like, for example, they have been enfolded into the Chinatown Business Improvement District employees. They go out of their way, terrorizing unhoused people, trying to mace a grandmother, have been trying to upset the community when I was here in the park, and they have a very close relationship with the police. So that's disconcerting as well. They are not business improvement district, and police officers should not be in the forefront of any shelter anyway, but I digress. But please continue.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what else to add. I saw that the conditions were not ideal. I'm not surprised. It was built in like 10 seconds.
What other shelters do you go to besides North Hollywood?
Oh, actually, the North Hollywood I was not able to get into, so it's the Granada Hills one that I'm mostly talking about.
Oh, okay.
At least on Monday when I went, I was surprised the beds weren't filled. However, Granada is very inaccessible. I definitely have a certain level of privilege. I simply Ubered from North Hollywood to Granada Hills, and it's the same thing that I said about the North Hollywood one. It's not ideal. There's no real ability to quarantine. The motel, unhoused people have been saying what they wanted, so clearly these are not built they weren't built while talking unhoused people. They just did it themselves.
Well, that's the problem. That's been the problem for so long. And I was on a meeting, and it's very apparent that it's a very patronizing or paternalistic idea about unhoused people. For example, one of the leaders said that they feel comfortable if the police were on the bus with unhoused people. and that showed me his privilege and his shelteredness. The second thing that I have is that because the reason why many times many of these shelters are inaccessible, we must acknowledge the part that we as society has played on against unhoused people. The NIMBYism has dictated the viewpoint of unhoused people as criminals. Case in point, in that same meeting, someone, and I got pretty irate about it, and I want to tell our audiences, one of them was saying they were worried about unhoused people creating burglaries on property, and how can we assure these people? And I tell this answer to you is publicly. We're in a pandemic where people are dying, and it is not due to the unhoused people. We don't give a damn about but we don't care about some material possession because it's irrelevant at this point. People are dying by almost thousands. It's a global pandemic. And if you have to hold your hand and coddle you for your biases, then that says there's something we need to really re-examine. And most importantly, the ones that are helping unhoused people, let's understand this. Unhoused people need to be heard and need to be listened to, instead of being patronized and told that we should be able to grin and bear it in these different shelters. I have a question. Did you hear about the 30 unhoused people that are affected with the coronavirus in the shelter?
To be honest, I did not.
That is one of the reasons why many, especially the CDC director has stated herself, we social distance ourselves. We are also we're required to be in motels. The only reason why that I think they could be greed and just basically the disdain that people have for unhoused people. Do you have, did you notice that there were garbage cans there for unhoused people to put their belongings? What do you think that says as a message to the unhoused community?
I've seen sweeps that it's inappropriate, but that your belongings are trash, and that's not up for us to determine. That's what is yours is yours. It should be respected. But yes, I did notice that. At a shelter, you can't bring all your things into there.
That's another stumbling block why unhoused people might not be using those shelters. But the second thing is that it's the message to me as an unhoused person that is always, you're trying to always let me know where my place was, because my stuff is garbage. At a moment's notice, you can dump it in the trash. And most importantly, the security and business improvement district and the police officers are always the first person to be called, or they're calling the police on us. So that is also another subtle dig at unhoused people, that we're all criminals and drug addiction. So what else, other things, have you talked with any of the unhoused, or what was your perspective when you first saw this? Did they have any reason to want to go to the shelter?
No. That's the big thing. Like, when you actually ask, like, unhoused folks, then you definitely hear that a lot. I remember one person I spoke with, they said that it reminded them of prison. Mm-hmm. And I've known some residents in, like, Echo Park, for instance, and I get it. Echo Park is beautiful. Like, I love walking around parks, and just being outdoors is nice. I talk, like, a lot of crap about, like, LA polluted air and stuff, but I do like going out. I get it. So, yeah.
So as the parks is not just for the housed NIMBYs to have an Easter egg hunt, it's also for unhoused people as well. They are citizens. They have the right to enjoy it, but we are in a housing epidemic as well as a pandemic. And if we are in this together, then we have to start to break down and dismantle some of the stumbling blocks. One of the stumbling blocks, I think, is the housed community has got to understand. You may be pretty soon, if this pandemic continues, you may be having your things out there in Echo Park in a tent. And then, as funny as it is, someone may be calling the police on you. You may not get that job that you hate to see unhoused people are out here in the wilderness. And most importantly, you may be considered a drug addict or a drug dealer or whatever. So we are truly in this together. Also, I wanted to talk about the coronavirus implications. I don't want to presume, but could you tell us, if you don't mind, your ethnicity?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm Vietnamese. Yeah, I'm Vietnamese.
Okay, so as a Vietnamese, because we've been talking about this, there's been a lot of anti-Asian sentiment. Do you want to discuss a little bit about that and why that is dangerous? Because I'm Weedy Unhoused is against this, and I've been making some episodes on it, and I really want to talk about this so we can understand that these walls, these tribalistic walls, and pointing fingers of blame, it's inappropriate. So please.
Oh yeah. Thank you for asking. I'm honestly mostly frustrated with Asian people who suddenly want to talk about racism throughout this pandemic, when they were quiet the whole time when like Black and Latinx people were talking about racism. I mean, that was my big issue on it. Of course I don't like think it's fun, like, you know, the racism towards Asians because of this. Like, of course that's not okay. It's just this shouldn't be the first time Asian people are talking about racism. I think you should have cared before it became relevant, or we should have cared before it became relevant. But yeah, I mean, I've heard of a couple cases where like some Asian people have like actually been physically like harmed and stuff, and
exactly.
That is unfortunate. Like, of course, like, I think that's disgusting. Yeah.
Well said. I do have that issue, and I also have one of the issues is because we're in this pandemic, people are returning back to the old biases. I had a very friend of mine that has listening to some very problematic things and is blaming unhoused people for the coronavirus. So let's be clear, unhoused people are not traveling overseas with the coronavirus. Let's be clear. The Asians, Americans, not in total, are not the ones with coronavirus. The coronavirus has been out before the coronavirus pandemic. It's just taken another mutation, and it's always been here. It's been here at least for like 5 or 6 years. So we need to be clear about that. They didn't just pop up in Wuhan, China, and or like some of the conspiracy theories says that it was in a lab, and you know, it's just feeble attempts to make sense of superstitious ideas. So I want to say, is there anything else you want to tell the guests about the coronavirus or the shelters, or to get us to bridge this divide that we have together?
Something that I've been thinking a lot about is this is clearly a health issue, and it should be responded with health care, not with policing. And the big thing is shelters are not an answer. I'm not saying anything new. You and other unhoused folk have been saying this. I mean, the unhoused need a house. It's not unsheltered people, it's unhoused. We all have the right to quarantine. We all have the right to housing, affordable housing. So I'm not saying anything new, but that's what I just feel.
I totally agree. And most importantly is that coronavirus does not discriminate by age, gender, orientation, what color eyes you have, if you have one hand or not. It does not care. Death is death. And so we all must take the necessary precautions, but we cannot give way to racism, bigotry, and tribalistic ideas or societal bias about unhoused, anti-Asian, anti-Black, or anti-anything of the sentiment that is being dispersed out here in our society, particularly by President Trump. This is Theo Henderson from Weedy Unhoused, and I thank you all for listening. May we again meet in the light of understanding. Thank you for joining us. About non-essential businesses, and it's I come from a different perspective. It's because we have an economic insecurity already. We have people being paid very minimal wages. We've had battles over why should we pay people a living wage. And then we have the people that accept the crumbs of $2 to stay working. But the problem is, like, imagine, if you will, if that you're sleeping and you're tossing and turning, and the jobs that you consider essential for keeping your family afloat, keeping your kids fed, and keeping you have a roof over your head, and you're still worried and you're not sure because you looked at your text and found out that they have either laid you off or haven't called you and said they'll call you back for your job, and you look out and your door taped to it is an eviction notice because you can't make the rent. Now, what is essential? So these businesses that Mayor Garcetti is talking about, he's cutting water and power off, he's not thinking it through, because these people are using these, like, for example, hair barber shops and things like that. It's not a luxury like the people are going on Coachella or going on to a concert. These things are self-sustaining, and particularly in the market maybe that they had records that they couldn't find jobs in the mainstream.
they maybe have to have creative jobs, maybe like plumbers. Is that a non-essential job? I didn't hear them say that to be taken out, because what if the toilet overflows? And you say that they're a non-essential job, and they have businesses where they have to use apparatus to keep things going. Okay, those things that I think of. Veterinarian, they did say veterinarians can stay open. They say hospitals, but is that for pets? What if your pet gets sick? And people utilize, particularly unhoused people, utilize pets for support and disabled community as well. So we're not really thinking it. We just we see a bunch of people at a beach, and we just we're just thinking non-essential services. So yeah, that's not. The imagery is important, but we also have to ask the deeper question. One of the things that I also want to talk about is the belief system that because you're young, that you're invincible. That usually passes over a lot, but a lot of young from 18 to 45 are being gravely ill, and 18 to 65 are either in severe illness or dying. So when we see those kind of images of people running around having the time of their lives, or enjoying their spring break, what is your thoughts on that?
Specifically, okay, you mentioned a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which one do you want me to address specifically?
Well, you jump in where you can fit in. I won't dictate what you want to do.
I think I do think that, I guess I'll just speak for younger audience of 25, and I do think that some of us think that we can just do whatever we want, not really be so concerned, just focus on the future. The president's report. In fact, my dad talked to me yesterday, and was when I was your age, there was a time I fell and I hurt my ribs so much I couldn't breathe, and I think that affects me to this day. Mm-hmm. And he was just talking about that yesterday with me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that we should all basically just look out for each other and not just worry about the future, but the present is important.
Do you worry about, for example, especially you said you're 25. Let's look at it from the angle too. When this coronavirus pandemic scare hit, I was at UCLA, and I was part of a program that was called Discussing Inhumane Infrastructures. And I was talking about the different infrastructures that are in place, particularly this obsession or this predilection for certain wealth or people that have been brainwashed that the police are the answer to the unhoused problem. And then I heard that they were closing down the campus. And there was a lot of unhoused people that are students, that are college students. And we were raising the question of where they're going to go. They can't self-quarantine themselves, because what happens if they live over in a different place or a different area when they're shutting down airports or they're locking people in place? What's going to happen to them? How are they going to finish their schooling? Maybe they were on a student work program, and how are they going to survive? So, that's another issue I'm thinking about. For example, I already mentioned about people that have had Homeboys Industry. Homeboys Industry is a program that helps people turn their lives around. And the social pandemic has probably slowed down business because they get a lot of their monies by opening up a area where people eat. But people are not going in there. And so how are they going to survive? And we were trying to get them to a point where that they can be enfolded back into society. But what's going to happen to them? So, that's just my thought. But do you have any other expansive thoughts? Or I'm just spitballing here.
No, nothing's coming to my mind, but I've heard of things that you have mentioned. It's scary. How are we going to maintain, businesses and people still just have life with it?
So, do you think one of the solutions is, and which people are already in lockstep is, do you think one of the solutions is letting city council take a break and not hear from them for the first of the month while people are worried about if they're going to be out the street? And I think, too, part of them have heard about how the police treat them in years how. What do you think? Do you think there are any things in place to help them?
Yeah, definitely.
well, not the city council, people that are going about.
I mean, I'm sure they claim there are certain services available, but I mean, if they were so helpful, then why do we have like a housing population of about 50,000?
That's pretty much true.
Yeah, like the police should not be like ever like the first line of defense. I mean, you shouldn't be armed. There's a lot of things that's wrong with them, but like, yeah, this is gonna get worse if the city council doesn't address it.
I totally agree, and we're going to see. We already have over 60,000 unhoused people now. Can you imagine, if you will, that because some of the new ideas that they're in place of giving them having to pay back program in 6 months and penalizing the unhoused and as well as the housed community that is a eggshell away from being out on the street. That's really, nothing is really helping them. Even the stimulus, they're taxing that. So I mean, what benefit is all of these things if you continually trying to push that, pick yourself up by your bootstraps?
I really don't like that mentality, or that. Yeah, that's just. It's wrong.
Yeah,
it's inhumane.
exactly. But it also pushes. It gives the cover that you are concerned, that you're a good person. I had a question, and I actually had a very good conversation with a friend of mine, and we were having a conversation, and in his mind, which is incorrect, but his mind is people are not talking about people that are disabled. We're talking about people that I was mentioning for some context, that Trump was trying to cut people's benefits off of disability benefits. And one of the things that I think one of the older generations that is part of the problem in their thinking is they always believe because I had it rough and I didn't have this, everyone else should suffer. And it's destructive. So it's a waste of time. So he's saying like, well, there are people that are on there that taking advantage of it and they shouldn't be. And so that's what he's talking about. I was like, how do you know he's talking about that? Because it is shown that history has shown that every time that Trump says something, he says something that other people are being affected. They have nothing to do with it. Case in point, coronavirus. Case in point, the Islamic hatred that is going on. Case in point, the Mexican rapist narrative. Case in point, shithole countries. So you automatically would assume that he's going to start to really do the right thing. And in fact, maybe a small percentage of people that they have been taking advantage of the benefits. And where he's going to crack down on millions of people that really need it. So that's my thing. I says, that thinking is why a lot of this racial and economic disparities are as they are. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was kind of that. What was I going to say? I was kind of remembering the bootstrap analogy. I was talking kind of similar, where it's just like there's a belief that someone who's housed, for example, that they did something, they did more to deserve what they have, but that's not true. For my case, my family's case, we just, because we are Asian, my mom, both my parents, some refugees, but they're just people who abandoned their country. I'm Vietnamese, so when Vietnam liberated themselves, they ran away from that. So we just had a heads up because we already had a connection with America and stuff like that. We started off with a head start. I didn't do, or my family didn't do more to deserve a home more than what you did. In fact, you're doing more than what my parents have done. Honestly, my parents have they just want to protect themselves, but you're here. You care about. I mean, if everyone just got on board with what you were saying, that everyone would benefit from that. So that's a big thing. People have more think that they did more.
I agree.
And that's wrong.
Okay. And I think that's the long and short of it, because the person went on to enumerate the illnesses and the illnesses that they have, and they're working. And why can't disabled people work? There are jobs out there. That's another thing. There are jobs out there. That's supposed to be the main. That's one of the things I wish the boomer generation would stop this nonsense. This is not after World War II, and we have to understand our history. The reason why the GI Bill was in place is because there was extreme poverty. Franklin Roosevelt seen that, and was trying to rebalance the scale. And the Republican Party now has been unbalanced again, So and believing that mantra, you may be able to work as you're disabled, but there are millions that are unable to, and that is maybe not their wheelhouse to work at a grocery store and work themselves into another injury or things like that and keep working. We have got to understand that with capitalism, there are winners and there are people that are not going to be as successful, and not because of their personal defect. They didn't want it hard enough. They just didn't go to school. They didn't listen to anybody. That's just nonsensical, and it's dangerous because we pass this stuff on to the new generation, believing that they had some ridiculous advantage because they worked hard, and people just don't want to do the right thing in America, which is a lie.
Well, I agree. You're talking about the boomers.
Yeah.
I don't think people my age are exempt just because we were raised by that, and being very critical of that. So I mean, I think I see very similar things. People my age feel they still believe in that, like the whole by the bootstrap analogy.
Right.
My age. Right. I mean, I believe I did for a time too. I think I'm getting to learn and see that it's submit.
And one of the things I noticed too, because I have had friends and things of that nature, but I look back my own history and I kept saying, that can't be possibly right. Because even when I was going through and I had a financial stable part of my life, I had people help me. I had people that gave me a chance. They did things to help get me to a point where I could be financially stable. Even with this podcast, I'm not doing all of it alone. I have people that help me. I mean, and I wanted always to point that out to other people that this is not a singular effort. If I know that, and I'm American, and my descendants are from here and help build this country, then we, as other non-people of color that are black, non-black persons of color, should understand that too. There's no deserving house, and there is no undeserving that should be out here in the streets. That shouldn't be the punishment. So every person must decide to walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. Please join us for episode 17. We're in this together. If you like our podcast, please subscribe to SoundCloud. And if you'd like to donate, please donate to our Patreon account. Thank you for listening again, and may we again meet in the light of understanding.